Hello, I'm Sophia, and I was 26 when this story began. You know how every family has their favorites. Well, my husband Adam's family was no exception. To be perfectly honest, my mother-in-law Elizabeth was the mastermind behind all that favoritism. Adam had always been the neglected child, while his sister Allison was the apple of their mother's eye. Their father Jeffrey was the only reasonable one besides Adam, always trying to maintain some balance in the family. I'll never forget the first time I met his family. The hostility from his mother and sister was like a cold wind hitting me the moment I walked through the door. Adam and I both felt it, though we tried to pretend otherwise. Looking back, I suppose they thought I wasn't good enough. Just an ordinary girl from a modest background. In their eyes, Adam could never do anything right, and bringing home someone like me only confirmed their low expectations. Elizabeth and Allison's constant insults felt like tiny daggers, each one carefully aimed to hurt. I remember Elizabeth's words, dripping with contempt, expressing her disbelief that her son could actually find someone to date, adding that she'd expected him to stay single forever since he had nothing to offer. Allison chimed in, comparing me unfavorably to her wealthy boyfriend, saying I was perfectly ordinary and thus suited for Adam. Jeffrey tried to intervene, telling them they were being barbaric and should be ashamed of treating a guest so poorly. But Elizabeth just doubled down, saying the real shame was her son bringing home someone so worthless, though she claimed she hadn't expected any better from him. Jeffrey apologized to us, telling Adam and me that we were a wonderful couple and that he was proud of his son. Throughout all this, Adam kept his eyes fixed on the floor, not saying a word. A reaction I would later understand came from years of similar treatment. I sat there in stunned silence, my heart pounding in my chest, hardly believing what I was hearing. Though Elizabeth and Allison eventually calmed down, they continued throwing barbed comments our way, like archers who couldn't resist taking a few more shots. That's when everything clicked into place. Adam had told me he was the family outcast, but I hadn't really believed him. After all, he was successful and one of the kindest souls I'd ever met. That's what had made me fall in love with him in the first place. As time went on, I began to understand why Allison and Elizabeth were so close. They were cut from the same cloth, with few friends outside their toxic bubble. Their aggressive and rude behavior seemed to push everyone away, like thorns on a beautiful but dangerous rose. Throughout our relationship, their attitude toward me never improved, not even a fraction. Adam and I eventually agreed it was best to limit our interactions with them. A decision that felt like both a relief and a sad necessity. About 4 years into our relationship, Adam proposed, and my heart knew there was only one answer: I couldn't let this wonderful man slip away. We shared our engagement news with everyone, but of course, Allison and Elizabeth had their opinions ready, like arrows in a quiver. They launched into their usual routine, suggesting our relationship wouldn't last a year, questioning how we'd spend our time together since we were such boring people. Elizabeth lamented that Allison wasn't getting married first, talking about how they'd been planning her perfect wedding for ages. They kept pushing us to wait, claiming we needed to be sure about the relationship. When I pointed out that we'd been together for 4 years and were now engaged, showing our commitment was genuine, Elizabeth dismissed it. She insisted we should postpone the wedding, saying no one really cared about Adam's marriage anyway. That's when I made a comment that changed everything. I suggested she wait until she had her own engagement ring before giving advice about marriage. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically, like a sudden storm rolling in. My words had ignited Allison's fury, surprising even Elizabeth with their impact. Allison lashed out, defending her relationship and insisting they were planning a much grander wedding than anything we could manage. Elizabeth jumped to Allison's defense, insisting that someone was already looking at engagement rings for her precious daughter. Allison eagerly agreed with her mother, warning me that she might beat me to the altar. She declared with absolute certainty that she would be the first to marry, demanding all attention be focused on her special day. Elizabeth chimed in, saying she hoped and expected Allison would marry first, as if it were her natural right. Adam and I sat there in silence, watching this bizarre display unfold like a bad theatrical performance. Elizabeth and Allison continued their animated discussion about Allison's imaginary wedding, lost in their own fantasy world. We spent the rest of the evening talking quietly with Jeffrey before making our escape. That night, I made a firm decision. Elizabeth and Allison would have no part in our wedding preparations or the bridal party. When they heard about their exclusion, they exploded with anger but quickly claimed they hadn't wanted to be involved anyway. Our wedding plans progressed smoothly without their interference, like a ship finally sailing in calm waters. I started to believe that despite their cruelty, they wouldn't do anything truly foolish. How wrong I was. I had severely underestimated just how low they could sink. About 4 months before the wedding, I received an odd phone call from Elizabeth. Adam wasn't home, so I had to handle it myself, my stomach knotting with anxiety. The phone felt heavy in my hand, but I knew I had to answer it. Elizabeth demanded I come to her house immediately, which sent warning bells ringing in my head. I was confused and skeptical about going alone, given how they'd always treated me with such disdain. Yet something compelled me to go, perhaps curiosity or naive optimism. When I arrived, Elizabeth and Allison were waiting in an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. As soon as I sat down, Allison dropped her bombshell. She was pregnant and needed to get married right away, which somehow involved my wedding. I congratulated her politely while asking how this affected my wedding plans, though I already sensed where this was heading. Elizabeth jumped in, emphasizing that this would be her first grandchild, making it imperative that Allison marry first. They demanded I cancel my wedding to make way for Allison's ceremony, claiming her event was more important than mine. I sat there stunned, asking why I should have to postpone my wedding when they could simply choose another date. Allison revealed their true scheme. She and her fiancé had deliberately chosen my wedding date, wanting all attention focused on her special day. I refused immediately, telling them they were being ridiculous and suggesting they should be the ones to change their date if there was a problem. Allison pleaded about needing to marry before the baby came, accusing me of being mean-spirited. Elizabeth attacked me for causing her daughter stress with my silly wedding. Allison turned to Elizabeth, claiming I was deliberately causing problems and might send her to the hospital with stress. I'd heard enough. I stood up and walked out, my head spinning with disbelief. Their outrageous demands felt like something out of a soap opera, too absurd to be real. On my drive home, my phone kept buzzing with their calls, while Elizabeth sent threatening messages that made my blood run cold. When Adam came home that evening, I could tell something was wrong by the troubled look on his face. He approached me with concern in his eyes, asking why his mother was claiming I'd been cruel to Allison, who supposedly couldn't get out of bed because of something terrible I'd done. I felt my frustration boiling over as I explained the absurd situation, how they'd lured me to their house, demanded I postpone our wedding until next year, and then twisted my refusal into accusations of deliberately hurting Allison. When Adam asked why they wanted us to postpone, I explained about Allison's pregnancy and her inexplicable desire to get married on our chosen date. Adam stood there looking completely bewildered, having had no idea about his sister's pregnancy or sudden marriage plans. He immediately called Elizabeth and Allison, determined to get to the bottom of this circus. When they arrived, Adam demanded an explanation about all these stories he was hearing about Allison. Elizabeth calmly confirmed that Allison was pregnant and wanted our wedding date, insisting we should cancel our plans. Adam's voice was filled with hurt as he asked why he had to hear about his sister's pregnancy from his fiancée instead of his own family. Allison dismissed his feelings entirely, saying his knowledge was irrelevant compared to their wedding date concerns. Adam's frustration was evident as he explained that cancellation was impossible. We'd paid deposits to all our vendors, and my family had already booked flights and hotels. Allison's response was cold and entitled, declaring that she took priority because of her pregnancy, dismissing our financial concerns entirely. Elizabeth jumped in, calling Adam selfish and suggesting we could just get married later, insisting her daughter's impending motherhood took precedence over our small wedding. I couldn't stay silent anymore, telling them their reasoning was ridiculous and that Allison could simply choose another date if she was so eager to get married. That's when Allison played her final card, dramatically asking if we wanted her to lose the baby from stress, accusing us of jealousy. She burst into loud sobs while Elizabeth cursed at us while trying to comfort her. I could see the anger building in Adam's face at their manipulative demands and accusations. Seeing his discomfort, I took charge and firmly told them to leave our house. They left hurling empty threats, like children having a tantrum. The next day brought a flood of calls from relatives about our wedding. It turned out Elizabeth and Allison had been spreading rumors that we were canceling our wedding. As people called to check on us, they learned about Elizabeth and Allison's scheme. When they heard the truth, most were furious about being lied to. Though a few relatives sided with Allison, suggesting we reconsider our wedding plans. We told them they were welcome to skip the wedding. We'd never forced anyone to attend and actually preferred a smaller gathering. When their phone campaign failed, Elizabeth and Allison tried to cancel our venue and catering. Thankfully, Jeffrey's foresight in suggesting password protection had thwarted their sabotage attempts. Adam and I were livid when we got calls from the venue and catering company. Though we considered not inviting them to the wedding, Adam's loyalty to family made him hesitate. I could see how Adam's lifelong conditioning made it hard for him to stand up for himself. Elizabeth and Allison continued their emotional torture of Adam. As he began to waver about our wedding plans, I knew I needed to be patient while helping him see how manipulative and toxic his family was. The situation improved when his father stepped in to reassure him. Jeffrey apologized with genuine remorse for Elizabeth and Allison's outrageous behavior, telling us he'd tried to stop them but they wouldn't listen. Adam's voice was heavy with guilt as he confessed he was starting to feel bad about causing all this stress. I turned to Jeffrey, seeking reassurance, asking if we were doing the right thing. He firmly assured us we were absolutely in the right, revealing he knew Elizabeth and Allison had deliberately chosen our date to ruin our wedding. Then he dropped a bombshell. Allison's fiancé wasn't even interested in rushing into marriage. My surprise must have shown on my face as I asked Jeffrey to explain. He told us that Allison's fiancé actually wanted to wait, preferring to build financial stability before spending money on a wedding. The revelation that Elizabeth and Allison were using a fake pregnancy and wedding to harass us left Adam and me completely stunned. We sat there in shocked silence, trying to comprehend how anyone could stoop so low as to use an imaginary child as a weapon. This revelation only strengthened my resolve to proceed with our wedding as planned. But instead of backing down, Elizabeth and Allison escalated their harassment to new levels. Their behavior became so unbearable that we had to block their phone numbers. Allison didn't stop there. She started copying our wedding plans while trying to outdo us. She booked the same venue for a separate event and arranged for an even more elaborate menu, all funded by Jeffrey and her fiancé. Elizabeth encouraged this competitive behavior, pushing Allison to plan an even grander wedding. They went so far as to buy the same wedding dress as mine. I was completely exhausted by their toxic behavior. They were trying to paint us as the villains for not prioritizing a fake pregnancy. As time passed and our wedding day drew closer, we received a concerning call from Jeffrey. It was about my wedding dress, which Elizabeth and Jeffrey had offered to store in their closet before all this drama began. I had accepted their offer since my own closet was too full to properly store it. Jeffrey's voice was urgent as he warned me that Elizabeth and Allison were plotting something involving the dress. I asked him how he knew, hardly believing they would go that far. He explained he'd overheard them laughing and plotting, begging me to come get the dress before he'd never forgive himself. I assured Jeffrey I'd come right away, but inside I was seething. Tears welled up in my eyes at the thought of them destroying my dress. A precious gift from my grandmother who was battling cancer. I rushed to their house, and with Jeffrey's permission, headed straight for their bedroom closet. There I found my dress, with Allison's hanging just 2 hangers away. In that moment, an idea struck me. I heard the click of heels approaching. Either Elizabeth or Allison was coming. Quickly, I switched the dresses and waited. Sure enough, Elizabeth appeared, greeting me with her usual condescending tone, asking if I'd finally come to apologize and cancel my wedding. I kept my voice steady as I told her she was dreaming, saying I was just there to collect my dress. She stepped toward me, demanding I wait because she had something to do. Before I could react, she snatched what she thought was my dress and ran into the closet, locking the door behind her. All I could hear was the sound of scissors cutting through fabric. When the door opened, pieces of wedding dress lay scattered across the floor like fallen snow. She stood there triumphantly while I feigned shock, watching her destroy the dress as casually as if she were cutting paper. Elizabeth rushed off gleefully to tell Allison about her victory. That was my cue. I quickly grabbed my real dress and ran to my car. After safely placing the dress in the back seat and closing the door, I returned to witness the aftermath. I found Allison and Elizabeth near the closet, with Allison on her knees staring at the destroyed dress. Suddenly, she let out a piercing scream and began trembling. I discreetly started recording on my phone. Elizabeth looked confused as she tried to comfort her daughter. Allison's voice shook as she confessed to destroying what she thought was my dress, proud that their plan had worked. Elizabeth's face went pale as she realized they destroyed Allison's own dress, explaining she thought she'd grabbed the right one when she saw me leaving with a bag. They finally understood their mistake. They destroyed the copycat dress instead of mine. How dare you? I couldn't help but feel satisfied as their plan backfired spectacularly. Allison collapsed crying while Elizabeth tried to console her. That's when Jeffrey rushed in, demanding to know what had happened. I quietly stopped recording and slipped my phone into my pocket. I explained how they'd tried to destroy my dress but had accidentally destroyed Allison's after I switched them. Jeffrey shook his head in disappointment, staring at the shredded white fabric on the floor. He finally confronted them about trying to ruin his own son's wedding. When Allison tried to protest, Jeffrey cut her off sharply. He called out their behavior as inexcusable, asking if the pregnancy and wedding were all lies. Allison's telling silence confirmed everything. Jeffrey ordered them both to leave his house and never return. Elizabeth protested, demanding to know why he was throwing out their daughter. He declared their actions had permanently damaged their family relationships. That night, I told Adam everything. After a long silence, he finally understood that his mother and sister's treatment hadn't been love, it had been control. On our wedding day, we proceeded as planned without Elizabeth and Allison present. Instead, we were surrounded by my loving family, supportive Jeffrey, and true friends. A year later, we'd built a new life in a different city. Adam had started his own company while I pursued my dream of writing children's books. The harassing calls from Elizabeth and Allison stopped completely after we changed our numbers. One day, I unexpectedly saw Allison while shopping. She looked thinner and tired, quickly averting her eyes and hurrying away when she saw me. In that moment, I felt an unexpected emotion wash over me, not hatred or anger, but a strange kind of pity. She had lost her family bonds through her own destructive actions. Jeffrey occasionally updates us about Elizabeth and Allison. They still live together, isolated and avoided by relatives. Allison's ex-fiancé left her after discovering her true nature. One night, Adam asked me if I could ever forgive them. It's not about forgiveness, I replied thoughtfully. I just don't want to be chained to their drama anymore. We have our own life now, with new friends and supportive family, that's all we need. Adam smiled softly, and I noticed his eyes no longer carried that shadow of anxiety they once had. I've recently started volunteering as a storyteller at our local library. As I read to the children, I often reflect on how everyone can be the hero of their own story. No matter what obstacles we face, happiness is possible if we have the courage to choose it. Last week, Jeffrey visited our new home and said something that touched my heart. You two made the right choice in protecting your happiness, he told us. Adam, you really made the best decision. We've planted a small cherry tree in our new garden that blooms with delicate pink flowers each spring. Whenever I look at that tree, it reminds me that life is about the choices we make. Sometimes we need the courage to move forward to protect our own happiness. We'll probably never receive apology letters from Elizabeth and Allison. But that doesn't matter anymore. We have built a new life filled with love. In the end, that's what truly matters.